The sky had been wrong for 2 days. Not stormy yet. Not the active, declarative wrong of a sky that is doing something but wrong in the preliminary way. The way a sky gets when it is preparing to do something and hasn't started yet. The color of it was a gray that had weight to it. A gray that pressed down rather than simply existing. And the temperature had been dropping since yesterday morning in the slow, steady way of a cold that intends to stay. Every man who had spent enough winters on the frontier knew what that sky meant. 3 days. Maybe 4 if the wind stayed south. After that, the first real storm of the season. And in a year when the summer had been dry and the animal signs had been pointing at a hard winter since September, the first storm was not going to be the polite kind. Will Calder knew the sky. He had been reading it for 20 years, and he read it now from the back of his horse on the empty frontier road, with the same attention he gave to everything thorough, unhurried, practical. He adjusted his estimate. 3 days. More likely 3 than 4. He needed to be somewhere sheltered before 3 days. He was not currently near anywhere sheltered. He was on the eastern fork of the Gallatin Trail, which ran through country that was beautiful in summer and indifferent to human concerns in winter, with the nearest settlement a day and a half's ride east and the nearest reliable shelter, a line camp he knew from a previous year, perhaps 6 hours north, if the creek crossing was passable. He had been calculating this when he saw the figure dot a T first. He thought it was a post. The scale was wrong for a person, too small, too still, standing at the side of the road in the way that things stand when they have no intention of moving and no awareness that they might need to. Then it moved. Just slightly, a shift of weight. A small adjustment of the kind a person makes when they have been standing still for a long time, and their body is asking them to move even when their mind has stopped giving instructions. He pulled his horse up. He looked, a child, a girl, he determined as he came closer, perhaps 7 years old, perhaps 8. It was hard to say with certainty, because cold and exhaustion compressed the apparent age of a child in the same way they compress everything else. She was wearing a coat that had been adequate for the fall, and was not going to be adequate for what was coming. Her boots were wrong. Town boots, not trail boots, the kind of boots that belong on a wooden floor, rather than a frontier road. She had a small bag clutched to her chest with both arms. The way a child holds something that is the last thing they have. She was looking at him, not with the instinctive fear that a strange man on horseback on an empty road at the edge of winter should probably produce in a child. Alone, or not only that, she was looking at him with the specific expression of a person who has been waiting for something, and is not certain that this is the thing they were waiting for, but is considering the possibility, with the serious attention that circumstances require. He stopped the horse. 10 feet from her, he looked at her, she looked at him. The gray sky pressed down on both of them. "Where are you going?" he said. Her chin wobbled once, and she controlled it with the fierce deliberateness of a child who has decided not to cry and means it. "I don't know," she said. He looked up the road in both directions. Empty in both directions. The road running straight and pale through the gray country, with no sign of anyone who might have been with her, or might be coming for her. He looked at the sky. 3 days. He looked at the girl. "What's your name?" he said. "Nora," she said. He dismounted. He crouched down to her level, the way you approach a frightened animal, getting small, removing the height differential that makes everything more threatening, and looked at her directly. "My name's Will," he said. "How long have you been standing here?" She thought about it with the seriousness of a child doing an honest calculation. "Since this morning," she said. He looked at her hands, bare, red with cold, gripping the bag. He reached into his saddlebag and found his spare gloves, which were too large, but were wool, and would be better than nothing, and held them out. She looked at them. She took them. "Are you hungry?" he said. The chin wobble again, controlled again. "Yes," she said. He stood up. He found what he had in the saddlebag that could be eaten immediately, and gave it to her without ceremony. He held the horse while she ate, standing beside him on the road, because the eating seemed to be something she needed. to do before anything else. He looked at the sky while she ate. 3 days. He thought about the line camp to the north. He thought about the girls' town boots and her inadequate coat and the specific gray of the sky. He made the calculation that anyone who has spent 20 years in open country makes when a child is standing alone on a road 3 days before the worst winter in recent memory, not a calculation about what was convenient or what was his responsibility, or what the detached assessment of a reasonable man suggested he should do, a different calculation, the only one that actually mattered. All right, Nora, he said. Let's find you somewhere warm. He had not always been a man who lived alone. This was not something he told people, because there were not people to tell, and because the telling of it served no practical purpose, and because the version of himself that had not been alone was a version that existed at a distance. He had spent years carefully maintaining, but riding north with a small girl on the horse in front of him, her back against his chest, because there was no other arrangement that kept her adequately warm. He was aware of the distance in a way he usually wasn't. The specific physical weight of a small person against him. The reality of it. The ordinary human reality of it reached something he had organized his life to keep from being reached. The people he had lost were a wife and a son. He did not think about them in narrative terms, did not construct the story of what had happened and revisit it. He had done that in the first years, the obsessive revisiting that grief requires in its acute phase, and he had come out the other side of it into something flatter and more sustainable, a life organized around not having them, a set of habits and routines and the daily work of keeping an operation running that left limited space for the thing that occupied the space when the routines ran out. He had a small ranch, leased rather than owned, in the hill country east of the Gallatin. He ran cattle on it in a modest way, enough to sustain him, not enough to require anyone else. He came to town 4 times a year for supplies, and said what was necessary, and went back. He did not form attachments. He was 43 years old, and he had learned, in the years since the losing, that attachment was a calculation with a specific risk profile, and that the risk profile exceeded what he was able to absorb again. This was not self-pity. It was honest accounting. When he had seen the girl on the road, his first thought had been, with a clarity he was not proud of, that this was not his situation to manage, that there would be someone looking for her, that the road was a road, and roads eventually produce traffic, that a man alone on a 3-day deadline before a serious storm had a specific set of priorities, and a found child was not on the list. He had thought all of this in approximately 3 seconds, and then she had looked at him. She had looked at him with those eyes, the serious, frightened, containing herself eyes of a child who has been alone long enough to understand what alone means, and who is looking at a stranger on a horse with the specific quality of hope that children have when hope is the last available option. He had seen that look before, not on this child, on another child, in another time, in a situation that had ended differently than it should have, and that he had spent years not thinking about, with the focused determination of someone who understands that certain thoughts are not survivable in excess. He had dismounted. He had not made a decision, exactly. He had simply found himself on the ground, crouched to her level, asking her name. The decision had made itself, in the place below decision, where certain things are simply known. Now, he rode north with her in front of him, and felt the particular thing that he had organized his life to avoid feeling, the vulnerability of having something to lose again, something small and cold, and gripping a bag with both hands and eating his provisions with the focused gratitude of someone for whom food has not been available for longer than it should have been. How did you get here? He said. We were going west, she said, between bites. My papa and mama and me, in the wagon. What happened to the wagon? He said. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know exactly, she said. There was noise. And then I was walking. And then I was standing on the road. He listened to this, and did not push it. The gaps in her account were not evasion, but the genuine gaps of a child's experience of a traumatic event, the way a young mind protects itself by not forming complete records of things that are too large for it to process. How long ago? He said. She thought about it. 2 sleeps, she said. 2 days. He looked at the country around them and thought about a wagon going west and a child separated from it 2 days ago and the various things that could have produced that situation. Does your papa have a name? He said. Everybody has a name, she said, with the slight indignation of a child noting an obvious thing. Despite everything, he almost smiled. What is it? He said. Thomas Elias Briggs, she said, with the precision of a child who has been taught to say the full name in case of exactly this situation. And my mama is Ruth Ann Briggs, and I am Nora Grace Briggs, and I am 7 years old, and we are going to a place called Millward. Millward, he said. Do you know it? She said. He did not know it, but he knew people who knew people, and he knew that the frontier had a communication network of sorts, the kind that operates through way stations and trading posts and the mouths of people passing through, and that Millward, if it existed, could be found. I'll find it, he said. She seemed satisfied with this. She leaned back, slightly against him, with the uncalculating trust of a child who has made a decision about a person and implemented it completely, and will Calder rode north toward the line camp and felt the weight of that trust, with the full understanding of what it meant and what it was going to require of him. He had not wanted this. He was in it. Anyway, she slept for 2 hours on the horse. This told him several things. That she had not slept properly in 2 days, which he had suspected, and that she had decided at some level below consciousness that she was safe enough to sleep, which was its own kind of information about where they were. A child who won't sleep is a child who doesn't feel safe. He took the sleeping seriously as a signal and rode carefully, avoiding the jolts and sudden movements that would disturb it. She woke when they crossed a creek, the horse's footing changed on the stones, and she came alert immediately, the way people do who have been sleeping lightly in uncertain situations. We're still going north, he said. Before she could ask, she settled. They talked, in the afternoon, in the particular way of people covering distance together intermittently, about whatever came to the surface, without the architecture of a deliberate conversation. She told him about the farm they'd left in Missouri, she said, which he could place, and about the reason for going west, which she gave in the approximate terms of a child, summarizing adult decisions she'd been present for, but not fully included in. Something about land, something about a better situation. Her father had a brother in Millward who had written a letter. She told him about the wagon, the one their neighbors had, the Parkers, who had been traveling with them because 2 families together were safer than one. She told him about the crossing. 2 days before, she'd ended up on the road, where the river had been higher than expected. She stopped. He waited. Something happened at the crossing, she said. Didn't it? She nodded. I don't want to say it, she said. You don't have to, he said. But I think, she stopped again. I think my papa and mama are still there. I think they didn't. She was working through something. The specific work of a child trying to reconcile what she knows with what she can bear to know. I woke up on the bank, and they weren't there. But I don't think, you don't think they're gone, he said. No, she said, with the certainty of a child who has not yet learned to distrust her certainty, and who, in this specific case, might not be wrong. He thought about a river crossing gone wrong, about a wagon, and the Parkers, and 2 families, and the various ways a crossing could go wrong without everyone being lost. About the bank she'd woken up on, and the bank she hadn't been on when she'd woken up. This crossing, he said. Which side were you on when you woke up? The side we were going to, she said. The west side. And the wagon. I don't know, she said. I was scared. I walked away from the river. He thought about this. A child wakes up on the west bank. That means she made it across, or was carried across, before whatever happened, happened. Her parents on the wagon, presumably, or in the water, were on the east bank, or in the river, or had been swept downstream. None of these were encouraging possibilities, but she had said, I don't think they're gone, with the specific tone of someone who knows something they can't articulate. And he had learned, over years, that children's unarticulable knowledge was not always wrong. Tell me about the place, he said. Millward. Everything. Your father told you about it. She told him. It was not much. The name of the uncle, Joseph Briggs, a description of the town as her father had described it from the letter. Something about a mill on a river that had given the town its name. But it was something, and it was, he decided, enough to start. Is there a place your papa would go, he said, if something went wrong? A place he would try to get to? She thought about it seriously. He always said, she said, that if we got separated, we should go to the nearest town and wait. He was very clear about that. She paused. He practiced it with me. Where to go, and what to say, and whose name to give. What's the nearest town to the crossing? He said. She didn't know. But between what she knew about the direction they'd been traveling and what he knew about the territory, he could make a reasonable estimate. Coldwater, 2 days east of where they were now, which was 2 days east of the line camp, which meant 4 days total. In a window of 3 days before the storm, the arithmetic was not comfortable, but arithmetic, in his experience, was where you started, not where you stopped. Nora, he said, I think your parents went to a town called Coldwater. I think that's where your father would have gone. She turned to look at him, twisting in the saddle, the oversized gloves making her hands look like small paws. Can we go there? She said. We're going there, he said. She turned back to face front. He felt her exhale, the long, specific exhale of a child releasing something they've been holding. He looked at the sky. 3 days. He started calculating a different route. They reached the line camp before dark. It was what line camps were, functional rather than comfortable, built for purpose rather than habitation, with a wood stove and a supply of dry wood, and a roof that was sound, and walls that would keep the wind out. He had stayed here before, 3 years ago, and it was the same as he'd left it, which was the way of line camps in country where people depended on them. He built a fire. He cooked what he had, not much, but sufficient, and sufficient was what the situation called for. He found in the camp supply box a tin of beans that someone had left and a half bag of flour, and these became a meal that Nora ate with the complete focus of someone for whom food has transcended the category of preference and entered the category of necessity. After eating, she sat by the fire, wrapped in the extra blanket he'd found in the camp's storage, and looked at the flames with the specific expression of a child who has too much in their head to be anywhere except inside it. Tell me about your mama, he said. She looked at him. Why? She said. Because you haven't, he said. And people who matter to us should be talked about. She looked back at the fire. She makes bread, Nora said. She always makes it on Sundays. The whole house smells like it. She was quiet for a moment. She sings when she thinks nobody can hear. She doesn't think she's a good singer. She is, though. He said nothing. She worries, Nora said. About everything. Papa says she could worry about sunshine. A pause. She was worried about this trip the whole time. About the river crossings especially. She was right to be, he said. Nora looked at him. She's not always right, she said carefully. But she's right more than she's wrong. A pause. She's going to be so worried about me. No, he said. But she'll be at Coldwater, Nora said. If she could get there, she'll be there, and she'll be doing something useful because that's what she does when she's worried. She does things. He thought about a woman doing things while worried, in a strange town, waiting for her daughter. She sounds capable, he said. She's very capable, Nora said, with the firm confidence of a child describing a parent in absolute terms that happen in this case. To be accurate, they started before dawn. The next 2 days were the days that the frontier produces when it intends to be taken seriously. Not yet the full violence of the storm, but its prologue, the cold deepening towards something that had consequence. The wind finding the gaps in clothing that clothing hadn't thought to close. The trail growing harder underfoot as the ground lost the last of its warmth. He pushed the pace as much as the horse could sustain, and more than was comfortable, but not more than was survivable, which was the calculation, not the fastest possible, but the fastest sustainable, the speed that could be maintained without breaking something that needed to stay whole, Nora did not complain. This was, he found, remarkable. He had limited experience of children, and had perhaps expected complaint, or the specific kind of demand that exhaustion and cold and fear produce in small people who have not yet learned that circumstances don't care about their demands. She did not produce this. She was serious, and she was present, and she told him when she was too cold, and when she needed to stop, and she did not tell him things that were not necessary, which was a form of travel competence he had not expected. He told her things as they rode, not personal things. He was not constructed for personal things with people he'd known for 2 days, or with people he'd known longer, but things about the country they were passing through, the name of the range to the north, the way to read a frozen creek for crossable points, why the birds were doing what they were doing, the difference between animal tracks and what they indicated. She listened with the genuine attention of a child who has understood, at some level below articulation, that information is survival, and survival is worth paying attention to. A tea ranch they passed on the second afternoon. A going operation, with smoke from the chimney and cattle visible in the pasture. He stopped and went to the door and asked about Coldwater. The rancher, a woman of perhaps 60, with the self-contained competence of someone who had been managing this land alone for a while, confirmed the direction and the distance, and then looked at Nora on the horse and went inside and came back with a coat that was better than the one Nora had, and food that was better than what he had. He thanked her. She waved it off. "Get the child somewhere warm," she said, looking at the sky. "That's the plan," he said. He rode on. 5. Danger hides in the wilderness. Saw the riders on the second afternoon not close a distance that was specific enough to be intentional. 2 men, following the same trail, at the pace of people who are not simply going somewhere, but going towards something specific. He saw them, and noted them, and said nothing to Nora, and continued at the same pace. He saw them again an hour later, still the same distance. Still, that specific, maintained distance. That meant they were matching his pace rather than setting their own. He thought about this. A man alone on a frontier road 3 days before a storm is not, in himself, interesting enough to follow. A man with a child on his horse, on a road that had been empty for 2 days, in a season when traffic was minimal. That was a different proposition. Word traveled in frontier country in ways that were hard to predict, through the same informal networks that carried everything else. And a cowboy with a found child was the kind of detail that passed from mouth to mouth, and sometimes reached the wrong mouths. He had heard, the previous year, about men who made a specific kind of business from the chaos of frontier movement, the families going west, the temporary vulnerabilities of travel, the limited law enforcement of in-between places. He had heard about it and filed it in the category of things that existed and that he did not intend to become personally acquainted with. He did not say anything to Nora about the riders. He started looking at the terrain differently, not for the best route, for the routes that provided cover, that offered observation points, that allowed a man to see without being seen, and to move without being predicted. This was old knowledge, from a different period of his life, and it came back with the uncomfortable efficiency of something that has never actually left. He found the high ground at the edge of a cedar grove and turned into it without announcement. Nora looked at the trees. "Why are we going in here?" she said. "Shortcut," he said. She accepted. This, he moved through the grove to a point where the terrain gave him sight lines in both directions, and stopped the horse and waited. The 2 riders came to the point where he turned off. They stopped. He watched them from the cover of the cedar, 50 yards up the slope, with the stillness of someone who has learned that stillness is itself a form of action. The 2 men talked. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. One of them pointing at the grove, the other shaking his head. A disagreement about whether to follow into the trees, which told him something about both of them. The one who didn't want to follow into the trees was the smarter of the 2. They sat there for perhaps 5 minutes, then they rode on, down the main trail, at a pace that was no longer matching his. He waited another 10 minutes in the grove, Then he continued through it, parallel to the main trail, in the cover of the trees. That wasn't a shortcut, Nora said. After a while, oh, he said. She thought about this. Were those men going to bother us? She said. He considered how to answer. I wasn't sure, he said. So I made it so they couldn't. She nodded slowly. That was smart, she said. I've had practice, he said. He kept to the tree line for another 2 hours before returning to the main trail, at a point far enough ahead that whatever calculation the two men were making no longer included him and Nora in it. The sky had gone darker, the wind had picked up from the northwest, which was the direction it came from when it was carrying something. He adjusted his estimate. 2.5 days. Possibly 2. He increased the pace. 6. The Cowboy's greatest sacrifice. The storm arrived early. Not the full storm, not yet, but its advance. The leading edge that comes 6 or 8 hours before the main event, bringing wind and a fine, driving snow that was less precipitation than warning. It came in the night of the second day, finding them still a half day from Coldwater. He had found shelter, not the line camp that was behind them, but a structure that had been a station once, for the mail route that had changed direction 3 years ago and left this building without purpose. The roof was intact. The door had lost its latch, but could be held by wedging. It was enough. He made a fire. He gave Nora the better blanket, and took the saddle blanket for himself, and told her this was the arrangement for the night, in the tone that didn't invite discussion, which she recognized and didn't discuss. He sat through the night in the cold that the fire could not entirely address, feeding it with the wood he'd found in the station, someone else's foresight, years ago, from which he was now benefiting, and listening to the wind outside and calculating what the morning would look like. Nora woke twice. The way children wake in uncertain places, alert, checking, reassuring herself, going back under. The second time she woke, she looked at him. Across the fire. You're cold, she said. I'm fine, he said. You gave me the good blanket, she said. You need it more, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she got up, with the blanket around her, and came across to his side of the fire, and sat down beside him and put the blanket over both of them. He looked at her. Don't argue, she said. It's warmer for both of us this way. That's just logical. He looked at the fire. All right, he said. They sat beside the fire, with the shared blanket, while the wind worked at the building outside and the advance. Snow tapped against the single remaining window, and he was aware in the specific way, as someone who has spent years feeling nothing in particular, of something that was not nothing. In the morning, the advance had passed or paused, the weather doing the thing it does sometimes of offering a window before the real event, and he used the window without hesitation. He was in the saddle before full light. Nora in front of him, the horse moving through a landscape that had been dusted with the night's snow, and that looked both beautiful and urgent. He gave her his coat. 2 hours in, she said he needed it. He said she needed it more. She said it was warmer for both of them if she wore it, because then she wasn't shaking, and her shaking was making him cold. He looked at her. That's not quite how that works, he said. You don't know that, she said. He put the coat around her. He rode the last 2 hours in the cold with the specific focused quality of a man who has decided that being cold is the current situation and has nothing useful to add to that fact by thinking about it, and who therefore does not think about it. He was colder than he would admit. He thought about Coldwater. He thought about a woman who worries about everything and does things when she's worried, and was in a strange town, waiting for a daughter who had been gone for 4 days. And the specific quality of that waiting, and he rode toward it with everything the horse had left. Coldwater was visible from the ridge. He stopped the horse at the top and looked at it. A real town, with smoke from multiple chimneys and the movement of people on the main street, and the particular alive quality of a populated place that was more beautiful than it had any right to be in this specific moment. Nora saw it. She sat very still for a moment. Is that it? She said. That's it, he said. She was quiet. He felt her take a breath. A particular breath. The kind that contains several things. What if they're not there? She said. He had thought about this. He had spent 2 days thinking about it. In the background of everything else, the calculation of probabilities, the various outcomes, the specific conversation he might have to have if the outcome was the one that the evidence somewhat suggested was possible. Then we find out what happened, he said. And we find your Uncle Joseph in Millward, and he takes care of you. But you think they're there, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I think your mother does things when she worries, he said. And the thing to do in Coldwater is wait for you, she nodded. They rode down. He went to the hotel first, because hotels were where people in transit waited. He went inside and spoke to the man at the desk and said a name, Thomas Elias Briggs, and the man's expression changed before he'd finished saying it. Second floor, the man said. Room 4. They've been here 3 days. He went back outside. Nora was on the horse, watching him. He looked at her. Room 4, he said. Second floor. She stared at him. They're here, she said. They're here, he said. What happened next was not something he watched closely, because it was not something that required his attention, and because some things are private in the way that certain human moments are private, even when they happen in public. The moment a door opens, and a woman sees her daughter and everything in her face that has been held at terrible cost for 4 days releases all at once. The sound that comes out of her, that is not a word, but contains everything. The way Thomas Briggs came through the doorway behind his wife, and stopped, and had to hold the doorframe for a moment. He stood in the street, and held the horse, and let it happen. After a while, Ruth Ann Briggs came down the hotel steps. She came to him. She was a woman of perhaps 35, with a face that showed clearly what 4 days of that particular waiting had cost, and also what the ending of it felt like. She stood in front of him and looked at him, and he could see her assembling words that were not adequate and knowing they were not adequate and saying them anyway. How do you thank someone for? She stopped. I don't have words for it. You don't need words for it, he said. She said you gave her your coat, she said. She was cold, he said. She said you didn't sleep. She said. I slept, he said. She looked at him. Not much, he said. She reached out and gripped his hand with both of hers. The way people grip things when the grip is doing work that nothing else can do. He let her. Thomas Briggs came down the steps. He was a large, quiet man with the look of someone who has been through something and has come out of it changed in a way that is not immediately visible, but is thorough. He stood beside his wife and looked at Will Calder. I don't know how he started. You don't have to, Will said. I know, Thomas said. But I'm going to anyway. He paused. Stay. Through the winter. We have a place sorted. The uncle has a cabin outside Millward, and he's sent word. It's large enough. And we owe you a winter at least. Will looked at him. He thought about his ranch, east of the Gallatin, and the cattle that needed managing, and the arrangement he had with the neighbor to watch things when he was away. He thought about the gray sky and the storm that was coming and the road back east, which was not a road he could travel in the next 2 days. He thought about Nora inside the hotel, with her parents, in the specific warmth of a family that has been broken and put back together. He thought about the line, camp, and the station, and the fire, and the shared blanket, and the conversation about the road, and the birds, and how to read a frozen creek. All right, he said. Through the winter. Thomas gripped his hand. Inside the hotel, behind the window of room 4 on the 2nd floor, he could see Nora standing with her face against the glass, looking down at the street, watching him. And when she saw him look up, she put her palm flat against the glass. He raised his hand. She smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile. It was, he found, a significant thing. The winter was the hard one that everyone had predicted. It came the day after he arrived in Coldwater. The real storm, not the advance. The full event that closed the roads and changed the shape of the land, and settled in with the serious intention of the season asserting itself. It lasted 4 days in its initial form, and then moderated into the ordinary hard cold of a difficult winter, which was still difficult, but was survivable. he stayed. Not because he had nowhere to go, exactly, although the roads were closed and the going was not possible in the early weeks. He stayed because the arrangement made sense, and because Thomas and Ruth Ann Briggs asked him to stay. With the specific sincerity of people who mean what they're saying, and because saying no to specific sincerity requires more energy than he currently had, he worked. This was how he processed most things. Through work, through the physical engagement with tasks that needed doing, which provided the structure that everything else could organize around. The uncle's cabin outside Millward was sound, but needed attention after a summer of limited occupation, and Will Calder gave it that attention with the same patient thoroughness he gave everything. Thomas worked beside him on most days. They talked, gradually, in the way of men who work together, not the deliberate conversation of people who have decided to talk, but the organic emergence of things said in the spaces between tasks, accumulating over weeks into something that resembled the specific knowledge of another person that friendship is made of. Thomas told him about Missouri, about the decision to come west, about the crossing that had gone wrong, the wagon ahead of theirs, the Parker family going over first, and the wheel catching on a submerged rock, and the chaos of it, and the water being higher than any of them had accounted for, and Nora on the bank, somehow, impossibly, when they'd gotten themselves sorted. "I don't know how she got to the bank," Thomas said. "She says she doesn't know either. The water was," he stopped. "She should not be here." Will thought about a 7-year-old girl on the west bank of a flooded river with no idea how she'd gotten there. "She should," he said. "She is." Thomas looked at him. "Because you found her," he said. "She was standing in the road," Will said. "Hard to miss. Nora found him every morning." This was simply what happened. He would be doing something, in the barn, or on the cabin's roof, or at the woodpile, and she would appear with the specific purposefulness of a child who has somewhere to be, and has determined that this is where. She helped where she could help and watched where she couldn't help and asked questions with the relentless curiosity of a child for whom the world is still continuously surprising and interesting. He answered the questions, all of them, with the patience he'd discovered, somewhat to his own surprise, that he had. She asked him once, in January, why he lived alone. He was quiet for a moment. "I had people," he said, "and I lost them. And I thought that was the kind of thing that happened once, and then you didn't let it happen again." She thought about this seriously. "But you helped me," she said. "Yes," he said. "Even though you might lose me too," she said. "Like if the storm had come earlier, or the men had caught us." "Yes," he said. "Why?" she said. He looked at the snow. "Because not helping you would have been worse," he said, "than the risk of helping you." She thought about this for a long time. "I think," she said finally, "that you were lonely." He looked at her. "I think you forgot," she said, "that having people is worth the risk of losing them. Because not having people is lonely. And lonely is worse than the risk." He was quiet. Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds, he thought. "You might be right," he said. "I usually am," she said, with the calm certainty of a child who has not yet learned to doubt herself and, in this specific case, doesn't need to. Spring came in March tentatively, the way spring comes after a hard winter, testing the territory before committing. The roads opened in stages, the mud of thaw giving way to the firmer ground of the real season. He had extended his stay through winter. He had been in Millward for 3 months. His neighbor east of the Gallatin had sent word that the ranch was fine. The cattle were fine. Everything was manageable. On the morning, he saddled his horse for the return. Nora was in the barn. She stood beside the horse and looked at him with the specific expression of a child doing the arithmetic of a departure and finding it uncomfortable. "You could stay," she said. "I have a ranch," he said. "I know," she said. "And cattle," he said. "I know," she said. He finished with the saddle. He looked at her. "I'll come back through in the fall," he said. "If the road's good." She looked at him with the serious, assessing eyes that had looked at him from the road in October. "Promise?" she said. He thought about promises, about the specific weight of them, about the ones he'd kept and the one he hadn't, and the cost of the one he hadn't. Yes, he said. She nodded, satisfied. She handed him something, a piece of paper, folded. He opened it. She had drawn a picture of a horse and a man and a girl, in the approximate rendering of a 7-year-old with some artistic ambition. And below it she had written in careful letters, "So you don't forget." He looked at it. He looked at her. "I'm not going to forget," he said. "I know," she said. "But take it anyway." He folded it and put it in his coat pocket. He rode out of Millward in the spring morning, the snow gone from the road, the trees beginning the tentative greening of the early season, the sky clear in the way it gets when winter has finally finished with the place and has moved on. He rode east. He had a ranch to get back to, cattle to check, a fence line that needed walking. He found something else too, something that had been in the drawer for a long time, and that he had taken out and found was not as broken as he'd thought. He rode with it. He thought he could manage that. A heart frozen by loss. He thought, doesn't melt all at once. It thaws in increments. A glove offered on a cold road. A shared blanket by a fire. A child who says not having people is worse than the risk. It thaws because something small and cold and determined finds it on a road 3 days before winter, and stands there, looking at it with eyes that don't know it's supposed to be closed. And it opens. Not because it wanted to, but because some things are stronger than the decision to stay shut. Some things, it turns out, always were. If this cowboy story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to Broken Spur Stories, and turn on notifications for more emotional Western stories filled with hope, survival, and redemption. Share this story with someone who believes that one act of kindness can change a life forever. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you had found that little girl alone just days before winter arrived?